The distant hum of the engines was interrupted by a sharp blip on the console. Captain Ava Drake's eyes flicked to the display, her fingers already moving over the control panel. Her pulse quickened. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. The ZRA fleet was here. Shit, she muttered under her breath, glancing over at her second-in-command. Ty Rojas sat across from her, his expression hard but calm. His dark eyes met hers without a hint of fear. "We've been expecting them," he said, voice steady as ever. "You knew they'd show up eventually." Ava's jaw tightened. "Yeah, but I thought we'd have more time to prepare." She tapped a few more buttons, bringing up the tactical map. The alien ships were already within firing range of Earth's orbit. Time was running out. "We don't have more time," Ty added, his fingers drumming on the console as he scanned the incoming data. "They've launched their attack. We've got to stop them now." Ava glanced toward the viewscreen, which displayed the vast expanse of space. The ZRA fleet was a jagged array of sleek, black ships, their alien designs a cold reminder of the ruthless empire threatening to swallow humanity whole. Ava's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the understanding of what was at stake. If they failed, Earth would fall. "Prepare the fighters," she ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. "We're going to engage them head-on." Ty nodded. "You got it, Captain." He moved to relay the orders to the crew. Ava took a deep breath, centering herself. The weight of command had always been heavy, but it had never felt as suffocating as it did now. She was responsible for every life aboard this ship, and every life back on Earth. If they didn't stop the ZRA, the cost would be unimaginable. Her fingers hovered over the communication system. She thought about the families back home, her sister, her niece, how they would wake up to the news of humanity's first defeat. She couldn't let that happen. As the crew scrambled to prepare the ship, Ava's mind raced. She needed a plan, something bold, something the ZRA wouldn't expect. She'd spent years studying their tactics, anticipating this moment, and she couldn't afford any missteps now. "Captain," Ty's voice came through her earpiece, his tone clipped. "We've got a problem. The enemy flagship just activated its weapons system." Ava's pulse spiked. The ZRA's flagship wasn't just any ship, it was a massive superweapon capable of destroying entire cities with a single shot. "How long do we have?" she asked, her mind already calculating options. "Minutes, maybe less," Ty replied. She exhaled sharply. "Get the fighters ready. I'll take care of the flagship." Ava's decision was instant. She wouldn't wait for the rest of the fleet to make a move. The ZRA's flagship had to be taken down, and she was going to lead the charge. She strapped herself into the pilot's seat, feeling the hum of the ship beneath her as it powered up. Ty at her side cracked a smile. "Ready for the fight of your life?" he asked. Ava's lips twitched into a grin. "Always." The ship surged forward, and the battle began. Sensory details. The hum of the engines amplifies the intensity of the situation. The cold design of the ZRA fleet contrasts with the warmth of Ava's ship, symbolizing the encroaching threat. Tension in the air, felt in every movement and conversation, creates a sense of urgency. Character development. Ava's tactical genius and determination are apparent as she immediately begins to formulate a plan. Ty's loyalty to Ava and steady presence show his unwavering support, providing contrast to Ava's internal turmoil. The bridge of the Phoenix was a cacophony of blaring alarms and hurried voices. Ava's hands flew over the controls, her mind working at breakneck speed. The ZRA flagship loomed large on the viewscreen, an intimidating presence in the cold depths of space. Every instinct told her to hesitate, to wait for backup, but that wasn't her style. "Captain, we're getting incoming fire!" Ty's voice crackled over the comms. His usual calm was punctuated by a hint of tension. "Shields are holding for now, but it won't last long." Ava clenched her jaw, eyes narrowing. The enemy's fire was relentless, and the Phoenix shook with every impact. A quick glance at the tactical map revealed more ships on the way, ZRA reinforcements, eager to finish the job. "Deploy the fighters," she ordered, the words slipping from her lips without hesitation. We're engaging full speed. No retreat. Ty's voice followed her command, a sharp, "Understood," as he relayed the order to the crew. Ava gripped the arms of her chair, feeling the vibrations beneath her fingertips. Every fiber of her being screamed for action. The battle was on, and there was no turning back now. "I'll lead the first wave," she said, looking over at Ty, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He knew better than to argue when she was like this. Ava had always been quick to act, unafraid to put herself at the front lines. That was the way she'd led for years, taking risks that others hesitated to take, thinking faster than the enemy could react. She had to. The stakes were too high. "Captain!" A voice from the comms interrupted her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Mara, the Phoenix's weapons officer. "We've got a lock on the flagship's primary weapon. It's charging up again. You need to make your move, now." The flagship's weapon was powerful enough to obliterate entire cities. Earth was at risk, but it was the lives of those aboard the Phoenix that made Ava's heart race. "We're going in," Ava said, barely above a whisper. Her eyes never left the view screen. "Ty, take us in." Full thrust. The ship jolted forward, the engines roaring as the distance between them and the ZRA flagship shrank rapidly. Ava gritted her teeth as she held steady. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, every life in her hands, every decision critical. Suddenly, the comms crackled again, this time with a warning. "Warning, ZRA missile locked on. Impact in." The voice was drowned out by the screech of a missile detonating somewhere on the ship's hull. Sparks flew across the control panels, and the ship rocked violently. "Hold on!" Ty shouted, but the words barely registered. Ava's focus was absolute, her entire being consumed by the battle ahead. She could feel the heat of the missile's explosion reverberating through the ship, but she couldn't afford to break focus. "Not now." "Captain?" Ty shouted again. "We're almost in range. Ready your weapons!" Ava's grip tightened on the controls, her mind already strategizing the next step. She'd been in worse situations, much worse. This was just another battle to win. "Fire on my mark," she ordered, voice cold as ice. "Mark." The Phoenix fired its weapons at the flagship's underbelly, streaking across the vast expanse of space. The moment felt eternal. The silence in the cockpit was deafening, broken only by the sounds of the ship's systems, desperately trying to keep pace with the unfolding chaos. But then, the flagship's shield flared to life, deflecting the incoming barrage with ease. Ava's breath caught. They were not out of the woods yet. The flagship was still alive, still a threat. Her eyes hardened as she looked ahead. "Get us closer. This isn't over." Ava's body. Sweat clung to her skin, and yet she didn't flinch. This was what she lived for, the heart-pounding chaos of battle. Outside, the ZRA flagship hung like a monstrous shadow, its weapons still firing relentlessly. But the Phoenix was alive, and so was she. "We can't keep this up much longer." Ty's voice crackled over the comms. The pressure in his tone was palpable, a rare moment of vulnerability from the ever-composed pilot. "They've got too many ships coming in." Ava glanced at the tactical display. More ZRA vessels were warping into the area, a small fleet forming around the flagship. The Phoenix was outnumbered, outgunned, and racing against time. "Shields at 40%, Mara reported, her voice steady but strained. "We've taken heavy damage, Captain." Ava's jaw tightened. "Give me a solution, Mara. I'm not going down today." There was a long pause, the only sound the hissing of the ship's failing systems. Then Mara's voice came through, quieter but resolute. "Only one option left, Captain. We need to disable their flagship. The rest of the fleet will fall back without it." Ava's gaze flicked back to the screen. The flagship was formidable, its shields absorbing every blow they'd thrown at it so far. But it had a weak point, a spot on its underbelly, just beneath its primary weapon, a point that, if hit, could bring the whole ship down. "Target their underbelly," Ava ordered. "Fire everything we've got. Ty, get us close." Ty's hands moved fluidly over the controls, his eyes sharp as he angled the Phoenix toward the looming target. "You're playing with fire, Captain." "I'm aware," Ava replied, gripping the armrests of her chair as the ship jerked with another violent impact. She could feel the heat of the Zeta-Ray's plasma weapons through the reinforced hull, but it wasn't enough to make her falter. The Phoenix surged forward, thrusters roaring to life. The tension in the bridge was suffocating, every second feeling like an eternity. Ava could hear the battle outside, the deafening boom of weaponry, the pulse of engines, the shriek of damaged metal. But she tuned it out, focusing only on the ship before her, the imminent target. "Ready, Captain," Ty said, voice strained as the distance between them and the flagship shrank. The firing arc was perfect, but the Phoenix's systems were barely holding together. They were gambling everything on this one shot. "Now, Mara!" Ava barked. The bridge erupted into motion as Mara fired the Phoenix's full complement of weapons, laser cannons, torpedoes, and energy blasts, all aimed at the vulnerable point on the flagship's hull. The shots streaked across the dark void of space, bright streaks of light against the blackness. The flagship's shields flared, but they couldn't hold. The first torpedo hit its mark, creating an explosion of brilliant white light that rippled across the enemy ship's hull. The flagship staggered, then shuddered as another wave of attacks followed. The enemy vessel's shield system flickered, then failed entirely. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. "Give them everything, Ty. Don't stop until they're dead in the water." Ty's voice was tight with adrenaline. "On it." The Phoenix didn't relent. Ava watched as every blast found its mark, the flagship now taking direct hits in its exposed areas. But just as she thought they were about to win, just as victory seemed close, an alarm blared. "Captain? We've got an incoming missile! It's locked onto our engines!" Ava's stomach dropped. The Phoenix was vulnerable now, its shields down, and its main weapon exhausted from the barrage. The missile's trajectory was deadly accurate. "Evasive maneuvers!" she shouted, bracing for impact. But Ty's response was a second too slow. The missile slammed into the aft of the Phoenix, sending the ship into a violent spin. Ava's body was thrown against her harness as the ship careened toward the empty blackness of space, out of control. The Phoenix lurched to a halt, its forward momentum completely lost. For a brief, terrifying moment, the ship spun aimlessly through the cold expanse of space. Ava's stomach lurched, her breath shallow. Every light on the bridge flickered in and out, the hum of the ship's failing systems vibrating through the air. The missile's impact had torn a gash in their engines, and now they were floating, stranded in hostile space. "Status report!" Ava barked, her voice rising above the panic that threatened to take hold of the crew. Mara's fingers danced over the console, her eyes darting across readouts. "Engines are offline. Shields are critical. We've lost power to half of the ship." Ava clenched her fists, heart pounding in her chest. This was it. They were sitting ducks now, no way to outrun the enemy and no way to defend themselves. The fleet was still out there, a massive force bent on their destruction. She could hear the distant hum of the Zeta-Ray ships, gathering for the final blow. But then she remembered, they hadn't won yet. Not entirely. "We've got a window." Ty's voice sliced through the tension. His hands gripped the console, eyes locked onto the distant enemy flagship. "The Zeta-Ray think we're done. Their fleet's pulling back. They're preparing to engage with a final assault. Then we make sure they regret that decision," Ava said, her voice hardening. "We have to disable their weapons now, while their guard is down." Mara's brow furrowed. "Captain, we're crippled. It's a suicide run. I didn't survive this long to sit back and wait for them to finish us off," Ava retorted, staring at the gaping hole in the side of the Phoenix. There was no time for hesitation. The enemy thought they'd won. They had to believe it to stay off guard. The crew exchanged glances, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. They were at their breaking point. Every decision carried with it the possibility of death. But if they didn't act, they were doomed. "I'm in," Ty said. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a hard focus. "Let's finish this." The plan was simple. breached the enemy flagship and disabled their weapon systems. The Phoenix might have been crippled, but its stealth system still functioned. With luck, and the advantage of surprise, they could do just enough damage to tip the scales in their favor. Ava stood, locking eyes with her crew. Prepare for everything to go wrong. Stay sharp. We either win this together, or we die trying. They didn't hesitate. The hum of the ship's emergency thrusters sputtered back to life as Time maneuvered the Phoenix toward the flagship. The Phoenix crept closer, hidden in the shadow of the ZRA fleet, its engines barely sputtering. If the Phoenix could avoid detection just a little longer, they might have a chance. The bridge was silent except for the faint clicks of buttons and the quick breaths of the crew. Every inch closer to the enemy flagship felt like an eternity. Ava's heart beat loud in her chest, her senses sharp as she watched the tactical display, her mind running through every possible outcome. Ava knew what they were about to do was madness, but as the massive silhouette of the flagship loomed ever closer, she didn't feel fear. Instead, there was only resolve. We're in range, Ty said, his voice steady despite the situation. Fire at will, Ava commanded. Mara's hands flew over the controls, and with a series of sharp, coordinated pulses, the Phoenix unleashed everything they had left. Lasers, missiles, and torpedoes surged toward the exposed weapon systems of the flagship. Ava watched, breath held, as the first strike hit its target, a brilliant explosion lighting up the dark expanse. But as the flagship reeled, retaliatory fire surged toward them. A volley of plasma bolts sliced through the void, leaving trails of light as they raced toward the Phoenix. We've been spotted, Ty said, his voice filled with urgency. Brace for impact.